today is Pentecost, and we're talking about the Holy Spirit today because this is the day we celebrate that the Holy Spirit came upon the church. It came upon the creation here. We have Pentecost. So it's an exciting day for the church. And Pentecost centers around this idea of God coming down. God coming down. All right? So and this is the thing. And I'm going to start off right here with the crux. I'm not even going to really build to it. I'm going to start the sermon right off with the problem here. The problem is that sometimes we get ourselves into a bit of a pickle, into a bit of an issue, in that we believe a lot of times, we believe by our actions, that we have to rise to some spiritual ascent in order to be saved, or for at very least for God to love us. That we believe that it's like, oh, if I can just read this amount, pray this amount, do this amount, then I will be able to seek favor with God, right? Yeah, that happens a lot. I'm guilty of that. The problem is there's no way that ends well for us because we can be trying our hardest. We can be trying to ascend ourselves up to be close to God, and something bad is going to happen. It's just true. Sometimes garbage things happen to us in life. And if we're trying to avoid those garbage things by going, all right, God, I'm just going to focus on you and you alone, that type of thing. We're just looking forward. And then something bad happens to us. We're like, well, what was all that effort for? Right? Like, why was I doing any of this? God, you're supposed to protect me. I was your boy, right? Like this is what's supposed to happen. And we're like, oh no. But we see in Pentecost, it's not the effort of us to go up, but it's all about God coming down. It's all about God coming down to us all. It's about God coming down to the world. And what's cool is, I don't know, 6 years ago is when I started realizing this. Because before that, I was all about this like spiritual ascent. It's like my worship time. It's like I need to get as high as possible, right? Like it needs to be just, like, oh, glorious. I need to get that feeling in my chest, that whole thing. It's like, oh, if I could just, it was all about that for me. And then I started reading the Bible. I know it happened in seminary, right? I started reading the scriptures, and I started seeing like, oh, there's the stories of God, and all God does is go down. He goes down. Look, at the Genesis, God comes down to the formless and void world, right? And creates something good out of it. God comes down to Abraham and gives him a blessing that was going to bless all the nations of the world. God comes down to his people who are stuck in slavery in Egypt and rips them out of Egypt. Rips them out of Egypt. God comes down there. And then, okay, all right, we got to talk. So, why in the world is this called Pentecost? Those of you that were in Sunday school, you know now. and they're all like, I know. Like that. I know that. Does anyone that's not in Sunday school, do you know? Like I didn't know. I didn't know. Like that's I didn't know what it was. So Passover, right? Passover. When was the first Passover? It was Egypt, right? It's God coming down and pulling them out of Egypt. Remember, they walked around and they went through the Red Sea. They went through the Red Sea, and then they pop out on the other side of the Red Sea, and then something happens. Moses goes up the mountain, right? And do you know what? You know how many days it was between Passover and Moses coming down the mountain? 50. 50 days. like that's, it's like that says 50. It's 50 cost. right? It's Pentecost, like the Pentagon. You know, it's 50 cost. You guys are laughing. It's 50 cost, right? Like that's what's going on there. So there's something connected here. So Moses comes down with the law. Remember, he comes down with the 10 Commandments. And again, my favorite joke from Mel Brooks' History of the World. You guys know all that scene, right? He's like, and he comes down. It's like, God has given me these 15. Then he drops it, 10 commandments, right? Like that. It's a hilarious scene. The confirmation students love it, like all that. But God comes down. God comes down with His law and says, "Hey, I have a new way of doing things." Now, the people of God weren't necessarily ready for that new way, were they? But we see this constantly. This idea of God coming down keeps on going, even as they wandered around in the wilderness for 40 days. I mean, not 40 days, for 40 years. I almost said 40 days and 40 nights like it's the flood or Jesus wandering around in the wilderness himself. But 40 years they're wandering around. God came down as a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And he came down to be in their midst in the tabernacle where he would be with his people. God comes down. And it's just this constant story of God coming down. And in Christmas, we see that God comes down and is born of the creation, born of his mother, Mary, right? He's born of that. God keeps coming down, but we see that that's what Jesus keeps doing. He isn't trying to ascend himself to the chief high priest and all of that. No, he keeps going to the people, those that are blind, those that have leprosy, those that have diseases. Jesus keeps going down. He even comes down to the very bottom when he dies on the cross. The entire story of how God interacts with this world is not one of the people trying to ascend to holiness, like we're trying to get to the courts of Zeus or some garbage like that. When it's that God is coming down to us. That is the entire story. So let's pick up the story. Let's pick up the story because there's some funny things we found, all right? First off, last week was Ascension Sunday. We didn't deal with it, but that's all right. That's all right. We're going to deal with it today. So Ascension Sunday, and we have Acts chapter 1, verse 9. I'm going to leave this picture up because I like the picture better than the actual words here. And so we see that Jesus is about to ascend into heaven. So Acts chapter 1, verse 9 says this. And when he had said these things, when Jesus had said these things, as they were looking on, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. And while they were gazing into heaven as he went, behold, two men stood by them in white robes. What are they doing? They're gazing, right? Like the disciples are gazing. So Jesus is taken up. Whew. I'm a public speaker, y'all. Like that's the Spirit of God was taken up, and no, did we lose it? No, we're still here. The Spirit of God was the Spirit brought kind of Jesus up, took him up, and they're all just kind of staring up there, right? They're all just staring up, and it's like, well, what do we do now, right? Like, well, maybe we can kind of see him. Have you guys been to a launch before over at Canaveral? I saw the second to last shuttle launch. I'm amazed at how far you could see it, but at some point you get there where you can't really see it anymore, but you're still standing there like an idiot, right? Like, I think I see it. That whole thing, like that's the shuttle launches were cool, but you're over there and they're just standing up staring. This reminds me of a story. Actually, this reminded of my friend Mark a story. Mark is my good buddy. He's pastor at Messiah in Tampa. If you're ever over on the west coast of Florida, go over to Messiah in Tampa. It's the same sermon because he and I write all of our sermons together. And he had this story about when he was growing up. First off, you got to understand, DJ, you and I, we got similar issues, all right? When I was in 5th grade, I was about this tall, right? I had a truly epic growth spurt when I was a junior in high school, and I became the height I am today. Like, words cannot express how big this growth spurt was, all right? Mark, on the other hand, for those of you that have met him before, he's like 6'5". Like this dude is tall, and he said in like 5th, 6th grade, something like that, he was like all of 6 feet tall. He's just one of those kids. And you know those kids are just like goofy too, right? He didn't say that. I just know that, right? Like he's just walking around tripping over his own feet. But because he was so tall, he was into basketball. He was really into basketball. And he grew up in Orlando. And in the mid-90s, when he was growing up, the Orlando Magic was it, right? You guys remember this? That's when they had Shaq. That's when they had Penny Hardaway and hope upon hope. Penny Hardaway was, when my friend Mark was in 6th grade, was going to be signing autographs in the Kmart parking lot. All right? And he was like, oh my goodness, if I could just ascend to the level of Penny Hardaway, if I could just get in audience with Penny Hardaway, then he could utter some word that would improve my game so that I'd be able to school all my friends in my neighborhood that he was already taller than, right? You know, if he could just do that. So he begged his mom to wait in 2-hour Florida heat in a parking lot of a Kmart to go see Penny Hardaway. And so they go, and he's got his little jersey and his hat and his little basketball card, right? And he's going to go get it signed by Penny Hardaway. And they're waiting. And as it's looping around, you know, he keeps being able to see him. He's like, oh, I'm getting closer, right? And he finally gets up. He's second in line. And then, you know, all of a sudden somebody grabs him, pushes him towards Penny Hardaway, turns him around, and like a flash from a Polaroid camera, like blinds him instantly for a second, right? And they turn him back around to talk to Penny Hardaway, and suddenly Penny's like signing his cards and his hat and all of that. And then Mark notices Penny beginning to form the words that are going to change his life, right? He's finally ascended to the level, and Penny says, next, and they rush him. They rush him off to the side, rush him out the door, and he says he's got this vivid memory of getting out to his mom's car, sitting down, and he was in the car before the Polaroid was even fully developed. That's you. He was expecting these words. And it was just these things. Like he was trying to ascend to this level, and it just didn't work out. It just didn't work out for her. And that's, listen, like the disciples are struggling with this too. Jesus has ascended the mountain like Moses did, you know, going up the mountain. Jesus has ascended the mountain, and they're all just staring. They're just all looking up. And I love the angel's response. Here, I'll show the angel's response to you because it's pretty comical. I think this is the angel's response. So Acts chapter 1, verse 10. And while they were gazing into heaven as he went, behold, 2 men stood by them in white robes. I say angels, you know. And they said, men of Galilee, why are you just standing there looking into heaven? I mean, it's like there's snark here, all right? There's some snark. Like, what are you doing? Like why? Like, how long were these messengers there next to them, right? That they're all just looking up. And how long were the messengers? Was it 2 minutes? 3? And those guys, you know, they're standing there. They don't have wings, but we'll pretend, you know, like that's the wings. And they're like, what are you guys doing? Like what are you guys doing? Like this Jesus who is taken up to heaven, he's going to come in the same way that you saw him leave. Like what are you doing? Like it's going to all happen. Don't just wait around. Don't just wait around for all of this. Don't just stand needlessly looking into heaven, waiting for it. Like they almost kind of get on to them for a little bit. And I think it's great. I think it's great. And I think that's what we need to watch out in our own lives. That we aren't just trying to like, ooh, I don't like the world around me. I don't like what's going on. I just need to focus on what Jesus is doing. I just need to focus on up. I just need to be looking up. That's where I need to be doing. That's where I need to be going. That's what I need to be focusing on. So like I'm only going to do certain things. I'm going to go over there. I'm going to like put my blinders on to everything that's happening around me. I'm just going to look up. I mean, that's a message that I grew up with. I imagine most of you did too. That if you just keep focusing on Jesus, then you'll finally be able maybe to be good enough to ascend into heaven. I don't get that. That's not it at all, is it, Jerry? No, no. We see that God comes down, and that's what we have in Acts chapter 2. We see that God comes down. Now, I got to apologize a little bit, Jerry. I don't do this on purpose, but the last 2 times Jerry has read, I've had very short readings, and Jerry has had very long readings. I was like, oh, this is funny. The last time I did that, Jerry was also reading, and but good job with the names, though, man, dropping them like a pro, like all that stuff. I just start mumbling. It's like, oh, it's Thaddeus, like that's all that you do, and you're just making it happen. Good job, man. But what we see in that reading is that God comes down. So we'll look at this. When the day of Pentecost had arrived, notice, it's not like Pentecost was created. When it had already arrived, remember, they came down with the law 50 days after Passover. When the day of Pentecost had arrived, they were all together in one place, and suddenly there came from heaven like a sound of a mighty rushing wind. Wind, remember, spirit, wind, and breath are all the same word. A sound of a mighty rushing breath, like a sound of a mighty rushing wind, a sound of a mighty rushing spirit. That's wind, and filled the entire house where they were sitting, and it divided into tongues as a fire appeared on them and rested on each of them. God comes down, and I love this part here. I love what's going on. Let's continue reading though. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. I love some of what's going on. I like all of what's going on. Let me pick on some of it though. I love what some of this is happening here, because it's this wind, this mighty wind that is going around, that mighty breath of God that animates all of the creation and animates us. Here, let's do something together. You guys ready? Let's all inhale and exhale. The mighty wind, the breath of God is in the place. You see that? Like all around, and it's rushing around. Then it splits off and becomes like tongues of fire above them that sounds kind of like that pillar of fire that led the Israelites through the wilderness in there. And then, so you have this mighty act in the breath of God, and God leading his people. And then you have these tongues. These tongues, and people start speaking in different tongues and languages, and it sounds crazy because people are like, they're all of a sudden speaking differently, like they're drunk. They're not drunk, like Peter says. They've just got the Spirit of God in them. They've got the Spirit of God. They start speaking in tongues, and this reminded me of something that at least I do. Maybe you do this. You do it though. Have you ever noticed when you talk to someone who doesn't speak English, what do you do? Sign language. Well, okay. Like that's not where I was going. That's not what I do. Like that's what else do you do? You yell at them, right? Yeah. Why do we yell at these poor people? Like that's. I was in Miami on Nicole and I's honeymoon. I was in a Walgreens, and the lady behind the counter didn't speak any English. I needed some AA batteries for my camera, and I'm just like, I need AA batteries. Like that helped. Like why do we ascend our voice like that? And everybody does it. We just yell at these people that we can't understand them, right? It's weird. Like that's like we do that. We ascend our voice. And the first place my mind went when I thought of all these tongues was how these people were now speaking the languages of other people, and so they didn't have to ascend their voices anymore. That they could just communicate. They could be with the people around them. This whole reading, of the Pentecost coming. It's God coming down, and we see what happens when God comes down. That there's a whole group of people there, and 3,000 of them were saved that day. It doesn't say anything about there were 3,000 devout people who finally got it. It says the Spirit of God came down, and 3,000 of them were saved that day. And they were all speaking one another's dialects. They didn't have to raise and shout anymore because they need batteries from the back of the Walgreens. Right? So here, what does this mean for us? What does this mean for us? Is that God comes down. He comes down to all of us. Listen, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't read the Bible or study. God is like that, like He's close to us. And in reading the Bible, we get to find out more about Him. In prayer, we get to be in communion with Him. When we come to church, we get to join all these cool people. Well, some of you. We get to join all these cool people in the family of God, joined together, being mutually beneficial to us. Right? We don't do any of that so that we can ascend to a higher plane. We do it so we can know more about the God who has come down to us. So I know, and I still struggle with this too. Sometimes we're like, oh, I just got to focus on what's holy. But by doing that, we may actually miss where God is working, saving 3,000 people all around us. So if you want to see where God is, He might be by that leper. He might be by the blind man. He might be healing somebody. He might be just around. So rather than looking up, go, where are you working, Jesus, around? Show me where you are. Show me where your Spirit is bringing your life both to me and my neighbor today. And I think that's what Pentecost is all about. Him bringing life to all of the creation, including you. Let's say a prayer.